We've had Ian Whittington out here a couple different times, and talking to him today, it was Captain Whittington, and now it's Major Whittington. And now he's not only in charge of the Greeley troop, he is in charge of the district, which is 18 counties.
13, northeastern Colorado.
13 counties, and in charge of basically everything from Cameron Pass to the Nebraska border. So it's a treat to have him here. And he's quote unquote called an audible today. So he's the program today. He's going to tell us all about the Colorado State Patrol. Then at the end, he's going to roll in the Sam Brownlee Award with his All-Star Trooper. So Major, come on up and tell us about State Patrol.
Thank you, Carl. I am so grateful for the introduction and so grateful for the invitation. It's been wonderful to visit with this group intermittently over the past couple of years. And I wanted to take the opportunity today. Firstly, I'll just briefly tell a little bit about myself. I thought I'd do this job for a year or so for the adventure out of college, and that was 20 years ago. That's all you need to know about me. But I do want to introduce Jaden Hilferty, who is a proud recent graduate of the Colorado State Patrol Trooper Academy in Golden, Colorado, is in training right here out of our Greeley office. And his training officer, Scott Downer, is joining us today. And I'll be able to share some more about Scott here briefly. But I'm so pleased to get the invitation to share a little bit more about not only the State Patrol in general, but a really special place within the State Patrol, which is right here in Greeley, Colorado. And I think everyone in this room, if you've been awake over the past few years, has become acquainted with these serious challenges that law enforcement agencies have faced throughout the country. But I'm not here to talk about the challenges that the law enforcement agencies faced. I'm here to visit and share and celebrate some of the opportunities that law enforcement has. And none was more apparent, especially in hindsight, than right here at the Greeley area in Colorado and with State Patrol operations out of the Greeley area. Now, to tell this story, I prepared a slide deck that has some show and tell, because really this story amounted and came to life because there was a variety of different stars that all aligned, starting in late 2019 and moving through 2020 and 2021. And I want to talk more about those stars, those different variables that all came together to produce something that was really very extraordinary, very special, and something that has captured the imagination of law enforcement, not only throughout Colorado, but throughout the region and throughout the United States. And even more exciting, not just law enforcement, but some of the story that I have to tell involves anyone who is in charge of anything. I'm talking about hiring people. I'm talking about motivating people. I'm talking about leading projects, leading initiatives, prioritizing. So we'll get into it with the first star that really had to align. And it's something that was not new, but it's the fact that Colorado State Patrol has always been a leader within the police industry, having a very well formulated, very well thought out strategic plan. The past few years have been no different in that. But what I want to highlight about our strategic plan is that we take the initiative as state troopers to come up with what our priorities are. And there are so many services that communities in Colorado demand of the Colorado State Patrol and of Colorado State Troopers. But first and foremost, that service is our mission to protect life. All too often, people throughout Colorado and throughout the United States are trying to get from point A to point B and are expecting a smooth sail, only to be tragically interrupted by a traffic crash. You may be acquainted with some of the statistics nationally that have indicated that traffic crashes, instead of going down as we had hoped they would, especially fatal crashes during the COVID era, actually went up. And I'll be able to point more about that through the course of my presentation. But really, from the standpoint of our mission to protect life, we can only do that if we can fulfill our other mission, which is not unlike a lot of employers around the country. But the Colorado State Patrol truly wants to become the best place to work in Colorado. And I think it's interesting to talk about an article or a series of really graphics that was published by the USA Today just last year. And if anyone here is in a line of work where you're looking to motivate and attract talent to your organization, I thought it was interesting some of the light that the USA Today shed on the challenge of bringing people on board with your organization and keeping there. I think it's interesting that the USA Today published the question, beyond pay, what are employees looking for from their employer? And the top of that list was a positive culture. As late as last summer, the USA Today advertised that the great reshuffle isn't over as employees seek flexibility work, and 18% of employees have already left their jobs as of summer of 2021. So this was a phenomenon that affected industries and sectors throughout the United States, and law enforcement was no different, where we had a lot of cops who, for a variety of reasons, decided that they didn't want to be cops anymore. That's the troubling news, but the good news is we had a lot of other people, young people especially, who said, you know what, I sense a calling and I want to join up to be a police officer or a sheriff's deputy or a state trooper, not only in Colorado, but with our partner, state police and highway patrol agencies throughout the country. To share a little bit more about that agency that applicants would be joining, the Colorado State Patrol, Carl mentioned that we do span all four corners of the state of Colorado, and in total, there are over 1,100 members of the State Patrol. That's not including our 8 K-9 units that are out on the highway, which isn't including our 2 bomb detection dogs that do a lot of their work down at the state capitol in Denver. Throughout the state, we've got 6 communication centers. Frequently, when you're traveling in Colorado and you call 911, it's a member of the Colorado State Patrol who picks up, especially in rural Colorado. The state's divided into 5 districts. We're sitting in the Northeast District, and you can see there that there are the 4 corners of the state with the Denver metro area in the center. We've got a fleet of nearly 800 vehicles. 9 ports of entry, also known as our way stations, are all part of the Colorado State Patrol. And our emphasis, while we have statewide jurisdiction for all criminal and traffic investigations, is more than 23,000 miles of state highways. I want to zero in on that look so that everyone can leave this meeting knowing more about what's special about Greeley, Colorado, and the State Patrol. CSP Greeley is one of 17 State Patrol troop offices located around Colorado. And you can see on this list some of the other locations. I think it's remarkable that a lot of people who have grown up and done business in northern Colorado associate CSP with the Fort Collins Troop Office over on I-25, or the Weld County office, which for many years was in Evans, and then after the flood more than 10 years ago moved to the west side of town. When you're in northern Colorado, you can associate state patrol operations with 1 troop per county, but really there's 17 throughout the state that cover the 63 counties within Colorado. In addition to our field operations that I just listed, we've got our State Patrol headquarters in Lakewood, our very historic training academy in Golden. We handle aircraft operations out of our facility in Centennial. There's a list of those communication centers as well as ports of entry. And another big component is our executive security and Capitol policing operations in Denver. But zeroing into that Greeley command, typically we'll run about 40 employees out of Greeley. And so that includes our vehicular crimes unit, which handles technical investigations throughout northeastern Colorado. Our motor carrier safety assistance program, which runs in tandem with commercial vehicle operations throughout the region. Hazardous materials has a couple troopers assigned to that. Our investigative services is a 1-person plainclothes operation that works in concert with other plainclothes investigators throughout the state. We have a wonderful victims assistance function out of Greeley. We have a trooper who runs our certified VEN program and handles our tow services. We've got civilians working in records, purchasing and supply and evidence. And then this is really what the crux of this story is about, is the 4 State Patrol teams that operate out of the Greeley Troop Office, which as late as last year was running between 5 and 6 troopers per patrol team, including supervisors. And now there's good news and there's bad news. The bad news is that State Patrol Greeley, our patrol function, is down half from where we were last year. That's the bad news. The good news is it's because we've been so successful in our Greeley operations that a lot of those Greeley troopers became sought after commodities for promotional opportunities throughout the state. So right now there's a lot of Greeley troopers who were working in Weld County last year who are now corporals and sergeants and specialty troopers throughout Colorado. And help is on the way, and one of them is Trooper Hilferty, who's right here, recently graduated from the academy. So we'll be back up to full strength before long, I'm sure of it. I want to share some more about Greeley operations as far as the geography goes. A lot of people in this room will recognize this map of Weld County. These are the different patrol areas out of Greeley. And it's remarkable because the Greeley office of the State Patrol actually doesn't cover all of Weld County. And Weld County is, in my opinion, one of the most special counties for many reasons, but one of them is it takes 3 State Patrol troops to cover it. The Greeley troop handles most of operations in Weld County, but everything east of the town of Raymer out on Highway 14 is covered out of the Sterling office. And if you're on I-25 north of Fort Collins, when that highway veers back east into Weld County, that stretch is covered by our Fort Collins office. So 1 county, 3 different commands, all handling the county out of those 3 cities. A little bit more of a flavor of the sort of work that is the bread and butter of troopers out of the Greeley office, and to get a sense of the scale. Between late 2020 and late 2022, troopers out of the Greeley office of the State Patrol conducted more than 30,000 traffic stops, issued more than 16,000 traffic citations, investigated more than 2,600 traffic crashes, and arrested more than 100 persons on felony charges and 600 plus on misdemeanor charges, including more than 500 arrests for DUI. This is certainly one of the most busy offices in the state of Colorado. Another characteristic of the Weld County office, the Greeley office, is its tragic reputation. At least a reputation that was mired in tragedy for a generation or more of troopers who worked out of this office. And you can see in this slide, this is a snap of the sort of administrative report that would land at highest command in Denver about how the different troop areas, we talked about how there are 17 different commands around Colorado, are faring as it pertains to fatal traffic crashes and deaths within those different geographic areas. And this is an example from late 2019, but it was characteristic of year after year after year of these sorts of reports, where Troop 3A, which is the code for Weld County operations, was always far and away the worst of the worst in Colorado for the number of fatal crash investigations that were occurring and the number of fatal crash investigations that were accomplished by troopers in that geographic area. It was in late 2019 that, armed with this information and a few other variables, came together. Variables that contributed to a remarkable change that has occurred and doesn't get enough recognition and doesn't have enough celebration in Weld County. But one of those variables that influenced that change is this very interesting article. And I would encourage anyone to Google this because it's a pretty fun read. If you're interested in a short magazine length read entitled, "Does the Highway Patrol Keep Us Safe?" That magazine length read is based on a much longer academic article that was published in 2010 by 2 economists. Mr. D'Angelo and Mr. Hansen published an academic article, "Life and Death in the Fast Lane, Police Enforcement and Roadway Safety." Did you know that in our communities right now, there are a lot of people who sincerely believe that police enforcement does more harm than good? I can tell you that this article points out scientifically, if you're interested in science, just how special and just how remarkable from a life-saving perspective police patrols are. And in this case, I don't want to get into too much of the minutia of it, but it's very interesting because what these articles describe is how economists would love to take 2 different identical communities and abolish police in one and build up police in the other and just see what happens. The problem with that is that would be very unethical and not realistic. But something very similar to that occurred about 15 years ago in the state of Oregon, where the Oregon state legislature had a dramatic layoff of Oregon state police troopers. Mr. D'Angelo and Mr. Hansen were able to use some very interesting economic methods to control for a vast number of variables and determine what the result of that mass layoff of state troopers in Oregon was compared to other states where that sort of layoff didn't happen. And they concluded in their article that if Oregon state trooper levels had stayed at their 1979 levels in terms of officers per mile driven on the highways, in other words, per mile driven by members of the community, about 3,800 road fatalities might have been prevented between then and now. Enforcement, according to these 2 economists, appears to have had the greatest effect in dry weather conditions outside of cities in the summer. That is precisely when we'd expect speeding to be most prevalent, and thus where the presence of troopers should have the biggest impact. That is a depiction that is very similar to the state of Colorado, where while state troopers have statewide authority, both inside of municipalities and outside of, much of our calling and much of our purpose involves highways outside of municipalities. And what better place to have a bit of a scientific experiment than Weld County, where we have vast stretches, not only of state highways, the state highways that I have highlighted here, a lot of the people in this room will be familiar with, they amount to about 350 miles of highways that frankly didn't get for years and years and decades, not that many calls for service on these highways. They're rural highways. Compare that to the blue line on the far left of this picture, I-25, which is where much of the calls for service was bringing state patrol resources in for a generation of troopers. And what's not depicted in lines on this, because there'd be more lines than you could probably keep up with, is the amazing system of county roads in Weld County, which if there's a traffic incident on a county road in Weld County, a deputy will likely respond and a state trooper will likely be right behind him, and the state trooper will take that investigation. So investigations of traffic crashes in Weld County, be they property damage or fatal crash investigations, are handled by the state patrol. What we learned as we went through an analysis of several years worth of statistics is that while, yes, most of our calls for service were in Southwest Weld, most of our calls for service were on I-25, most of the urgent need for troopers was in Southwest Weld and on I-25. If we were interested in saving lives, I'll point back to that second slide that I showed, that our number one priority from headquarters recently has not necessarily been to go where all the calls for service are, but to utilize our resources to get the best return on investment to save as many lives as possible. We were given an opportunity out of the Greeley office to do something very experimental and very unprecedented in Weld County, which was to concentrate resources on these highlighted rural highways where we didn't have a lot of calls for service, but where when we did have a call for service, it was usually a tragedy because someone had died. In fact, about 50% of that disproportionately high number of fatal crashes in Weld County was occurring on these highlighted rural highways in Weld, which became designated rural highways on January 1st, 2020. And what that meant is those motorists driving from point A to point B on these highways suddenly went from, for 20 years, rarely seeing state patrols on these highways to seeing many. A lot of that move was influenced by this book. Anyone who's in business or leadership or even just interested in managing your own personal objectives, I want to recommend this, and I'd be happy to talk more about just how much this title influenced what happened in Weld County and continues to influence state patrol operations. The name of the book is called The 4 Disciplines of Execution. The 4 disciplines that are described in the book are those of focus, leverage, engagement, and accountability. And what this book does a beautiful job of depicting is how so many people who are in leadership positions, it's almost hardwired in their nature to see not one, not two, but dozens, hundreds of things that could be fixed, could be done better, dozens, hundreds of different projects that they could be investing their time and the time of their teams. But the book does a wonderful and sometimes humorous job of depicting and demonstrating through a year's worth of research that organizations that have 1 or 2 projects, 1 or 2 serious projects, 1 or 2 serious projects that involve human behavior change to do something better for their organization or for their community, they have 1 or 2, they will typically succeed at 1 or 2 projects. Agencies that have from 3 to 6 to 9 projects might succeed at 1 or 2 projects. Agencies that have 10, 20, 30 projects running in parallel, scientifically and through the studies that have been done by the business gentleman who wrote this book, those organizations, those individuals that are running dozens of projects typically succeed at 0 projects. It's the idea of focus and what cascades off of that, of leveraging the things and bringing engagement of teams and holding those teams accountable to actually do what's right for the community and get things done, not just talk about it, but actually do it. So those were a variety of factors that came in. We were inspired by the 4 disciplines of execution. We were inspired by the academic articles that were coming out about the importance of police patrols. And so whether you realize it or not, the state patrol moved resources in a very significant way in Weld County starting in 2020, throughout 2020, throughout 2021. What happened? Well, COVID happened. a lot of societal unrest happened. And nationally, from a traffic safety perspective, you can see from this headline in 2020, traffic deaths increased nationally in 2020, despite fewer people on the roads during the pandemic. Fast forward nationally to 2021, you can see in this other headline from the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration that the United States Department of Transportation was updating data showing that road fatalities spiked on top of 2020 levels in the first half of 2021. That was nationally. And I can tell you that in Colorado, the picture was similarly grim, but there was an exception. At the same time that those headlines were coming across the board, and as engagement and accountability went up in a new style out of the State Patrol's Greeley operations, traffic stops went up 64%. And more importantly, that list or that map of highlighted rural highways in Weld County, troopers' rural highway traffic stops were up 142%. So this shows that where we were placing our focus changed from being spread across thousands of miles of county roads, from being, one might say, distracted by urgent calls for service on I-25. We took what resources we could muster, deployed them in places where they hadn't been deployed before. You can see that with the statistics. And before I tell you the real great results, I want to acknowledge the great work and the great partnerships that we have in Weld County of the Weld County Chiefs of Police Association and the Weld County Sheriff's Department, who were committed shoulder to shoulder with state troopers on this experiment. But here were the results of the experiment out of the Greeley area. Greeley area fatal crashes went down 58% during that time, and our rural highway crashes went down 71%. What that means is there are people perhaps in this room who are alive today who would not have been alive if it weren't for this experiment, and more importantly, for the hard work and dedication of state troopers working in this county during an incredibly difficult time. These were the headlines. Maybe you missed them because there was a lot on the news during that time. But out of the Denver media, Weld County reports 40% drop in fatal crashes due to targeted patrolling. Here locally, out of, or this was another Denver media article, Weld County and the Colorado State Patrol grow partnership, reduced fatal accidents nearly 50% in 2020. More contemporary, the Greeley Tribune reported that local CSP and Weld County Sheriff's offices were carrying our 2020 success on into 2021. And this is my favorite as someone who grew up in Northern Colorado and who recognizes the sibling rivalry that exists between Fort Collins and Greeley. And how challenging is it to get the Fort Collins Coloradoan to say something nice about Weld County? And we did it, because here's the Fort Collins Colorado reporting how Weld County cut fatal vehicle crashes in half in a year. And fast forwarding, as we continue to crunch data and as we continue this, what was an experiment, but what is now, we have proven the way to conduct business with state patrol operations, where between late 2019 and about this time last year, traffic crashes in the Greeley area were down, I should say fatal traffic crashes were down 81%. So what has that meant for the state patrol's capacity to say that we're the best place to work in Colorado? I can tell you that if you're an employee who has a mission that is achievable, who has a winnable goal, who has a winnable game set in front of you by management, it's not so much the pay, it's not so much the benefit, although those things are nice. It's the sense of purpose, and it's the sense of progress towards that purpose that will make any organization the best place to work, not just in Colorado, but anywhere. Obviously, we've undergone a lot of changes within the state patrol and within our community. And one of our strategic goals as an agency is to be agile, which we are constantly dealing with, including with those staffing challenges that I visited about, but also the optimism that help is on the way. And this is a great time for me to point out another very important strategic objective of state troopers in Colorado, which is to represent the communities we serve. And I can't think of a better symbol of just that craving that we have as state troopers, but to be here with Greeley Centennial Rotary, connecting with communities in this way. So thank you so much for letting me share this presentation.